Imagine walking into a perfectly silent forest, blinking, and suddenly realizing 5 hours of your life are completely gone. You don't remember falling asleep. You don't remember leaving. But the burn marks slowly appearing on your skin tell you that you weren't alone in the dark. As you listen to this story, put yourself in the shoes of the person living it. Picture every moment unfolding around you, every sound, every shadow. Then ask yourself, are these events real, or just the wild imagination of a biologist pushed too far? This is the story of Hoia Baciu, the forest many call the Transylvania Bermuda Triangle. Welcome, this is the corporate narrator, bringing you the most gripping true stories out there. If you love deep dives, dark twists, and stories that stay with you long after they end, make sure you like and subscribe. Help us grow our channel, because every new subscriber fuels the next unforgettable story. And trust me, the next one starts now. When you hear the word Transylvania, your mind probably jumps straight to fiction. You think of vampires, Gothic castles, and Hollywood movie sets. But buried deep within the hills of Romania, just outside the bustling city of Cluj-Napoca, is something far more terrifying than any Bram Stoker novel. It is a very real place. And unlike Dracula's castle, the horrors that happen here are not folklore. They are documented phenomena that scientists, the military, and locals are still entirely unable to explain. Locals simply call it Hoia Baciu, but to the rest of the world, it is known as the Bermuda Triangle of Transylvania. And to understand why it earned that name, you need to understand what happened to a man who tried to prove the forest was perfectly normal. From the outside looking in, Hoia Baciu looks like a typical, sprawling European woodland. But the moment you step past the tree line, the atmosphere violently shifts. The first thing you notice is the sound, or rather, the complete lack of it. There are no birds singing, there are no insects buzzing. Even on a windy day, the leaves barely seem to rustle. It is a suffocating, dead silence. The second thing you notice is the trees themselves. Hundreds of ancient trees in Hoia Baciu do not grow straight up toward the sun. Instead, they twist and contort at sharp, impossible angles. They look like giant, skeletal fingers spiraling clockwise out of the earth. Botanists from all over the world have come to study these twisted trunks. They've tested the soil, the water, and the genetic makeup of the wood. Their conclusion? There is absolutely zero biological or environmental reason for the trees to grow this way. The locals know better than to ask why. They know the name actually comes from an event that happened over a century ago. According to the town's records, a local shepherd named Hoia Baciu took his flock of 200 sheep into the woods to graze. Neither the man nor a single one of his 200 sheep ever walked out. No bodies, no bones, no trace. They simply vanished off the face of the earth. For decades, the Romanian government tried to suppress the stories. They were a strict communist regime at the time, and they didn't want their citizens believing in the paranormal. But in August of 1968, the forest's secret was blown wide open. A military technician named Emil was hiking through the woods with his girlfriend when the forest suddenly went deathly quiet. He looked up through the canopy and saw a massive, metallic disc hovering silently in the sky. He grabbed his camera and snapped a photograph. That image, which you can easily find online today, was heavily scrutinized by international experts and deemed 100% authentic. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was a massive, unidentified craft hovering right over the center of the forest. After the photo was published, the government fired Emil, but the damage was done. The world now knew about Hoia Baciu. And in the 1970s, a dedicated biologist decided he was going to strip away the ghost stories, go into the very center of the woods, and find a rational, scientific explanation for what was happening. This biologist, we will call him Dr. Aris, was a strict skeptic. He didn't believe in UFOs, he didn't believe in time portals, and he certainly didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in data. Dr. Aris wanted to study the most infamous part of the forest, a place locals call the Dead Zone, or Poiana Rotunda. Deep in the center of Hoia Baciu, the twisted trees abruptly stop. They form a perfect, almost geometrically precise circle. Inside that circle is a massive clearing where absolutely nothing grows. No trees, no shrubs, just a thin layer of dead, yellowed grass. It looks like something massive pressed down on the earth and permanently scarred it. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Dr. Aris hiked into the forest alone. He was heavily burdened with equipment. He brought mechanical thermometers, radiation detectors, soil sampling kits, a modern electronic camera, and just to be safe, an old-school, analog, wind-up time-lapse camera mounted on a heavy tripod. As he walked deeper into the woods, the familiar feeling of dread that every visitor reports began to creep up his spine. It's a very specific sensation that people describe when entering Hoia Baciu. It feels like a heavy, unseen weight pressing against your chest, accompanied by the distinct, terrifying feeling that dozens of eyes are watching you from the shadows. But Dr. Aris pushed through it. He reached the perfectly circular dead zone just as the sun was beginning to set. He immediately went to work. He set up his wind-up time-lapse camera at the edge of the tree line, pointing it directly at the center of the barren clearing. He then walked into the middle of the dead zone and began taking soil samples and reading his electromagnetic meters. For a while, everything was perfectly normal. The soil was just dirt. The radiation levels were baseline. He was actually starting to feel smug, thinking he had finally debunked the great myth of Transylvania. But then, night fell. The forest was pitch black, illuminated only by his flashlight and the pale moonlight filtering through the twisted canopy above. Dr. Aris checked his wristwatch. It was exactly 11:55 p.m. He decided he would pack up his gear at midnight and hike back to his car. He bent down to retrieve a soil sample. As he stood back up, the temperature in the clearing plummeted. It didn't just get chilly, it felt like stepping into a meat freezer. The air became so cold, so fast, that his breath instantly plumed into thick white clouds. Simultaneously, an overpowering smell flooded the clearing. It smelled like burning copper and raw ozone, the smell of the air right after a violent lightning strike. Dr. Aris felt his stomach drop. A wave of extreme nausea hit him so hard, he fell to his knees. His head began to pound with a vicious migraine. He reached for his electronic camera hanging around his neck to document the sudden temperature drop. It was completely dead. The batteries, which had been fully charged hours ago, were instantly drained to zero. He grabbed his flashlight. It flickered and died. Panic finally broke through his scientific detachment. He stumbled to his feet in the pitch black. The feeling of being watched was no longer a subtle paranoia. It felt like whatever was watching him was standing right behind him, breathing on his neck. He desperately held up his glowing mechanical wristwatch to check the time. The second hand was ticking toward the top of the dial. 12:01, 12:02. At exactly 12:03 a.m., the entire forest seemed to vibrate. A high-pitched ringing pierced his ears. Dr. Aris squeezed his eyes shut and grabbed his head in agony. A split second later, the ringing stopped. The nausea vanished. The freezing temperature was gone. Dr. Aris opened his eyes. The sun was shining directly into his face. He stumbled backward, gasping for air. He was completely disoriented. It was no longer the middle of the night. It was early morning. The birds were chirping. A gentle breeze was rustling the trees. He frantically looked down at his mechanical watch. It read 5:03 a.m. 5 hours had passed in the literal blink of an eye. Dr. Aris checked his body. He wasn't bleeding, but as he rolled up his sleeves, he found strange circular burn marks blistering the skin of his forearms. They didn't hurt, but they were bright red and completely unexplainable. Terrified and operating purely on adrenaline, he didn't bother packing his soil samples. He grabbed his heavy canvas bag, snatched his mechanical time-lapse camera off its tripod at the edge of the clearing, and ran out of the forest as fast as his legs could carry him. When he finally reached his car, he locked the doors and drove straight back to his laboratory in the city. He sat in his office, his hands shaking, trying to rationalize what had happened. "I must have fainted," he told himself. The sudden temperature drop caused extreme vertigo. I passed out in the clearing at 12:03 a.m., and I woke up on the ground 5 hours later. It was the only logical explanation. He began pulling his dead equipment out of his bag. His electronic camera was fried. His digital meters were ruined. But then, he looked at the mechanical, wind-up time-lapse camera. Because it didn't rely on batteries or electronics, the sudden energy drain in the clearing hadn't affected it. It had sat on its tripod, snapping one photograph every 60 seconds. For the entire 5 hours, he was unconscious. Dr. Aris immediately took the film down to his darkroom. If he had passed out on the ground, the camera would have captured him lying in the dirt. It would prove that he hadn't time traveled, he hadn't been abducted, he had just suffered a medical episode. He developed the film, hung the strips up to dry, and turned on the red light to examine the negatives. As he looked at the sequence of photos taken between 12:03 a.m. and 5:03 a.m., the blood drained from his face. His scientific worldview shattered completely. Dr. Aris was not lying unconscious on the ground in the photos. The time-lapse camera showed him standing dead center in the middle of the clearing, wide awake. For 5 straight hours, he stood completely frozen like a statue, his head tilted back, staring straight up into the empty night sky. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. As he looked closer at the background of the photos, he realized the massive, twisted trees at the edge of the clearing weren't stationary. Over the course of the 5 hours, the skeletal trees slowly unbent themselves, leaning further and further into the clearing, reaching their branches toward him before violently snapping back to their original positions right before he woke up at 5:03 a.m. The biologist destroyed the photographs shortly after developing them, terrified of what he had captured, and completely abandoned his research in Transylvania. He never set foot in the Hoia Baciu Forest again. Today, the forest remains one of the most heavily investigated paranormal sites in Europe. Thousands of tourists visit the dead zone every year. Many report identical symptoms: sudden nausea, dead electronics, the feeling of being hunted, and missing chunks of time. But whatever is causing the trees to twist, and whatever took 5 hours from that scientist, remains completely unknown. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you for watching. Seriously, it means more than you think. Before you go, I want to hear from you. What story should we cover next? And how can we make these videos even better for you? Drop your ideas, feedback, or even the darkest cases you've heard of down in the comments. Help us grow this channel into something unforgettable.